You'll hear socialists say things like, profits accrued to the owner are theft, as that value was produced by the employees and therefore should be owned by them. This is why you'll hear them say, you're always being paid less than your labor is actually worth, because the profit margin is being deducted from the value of the good imbued in your labor, and thus your wage or salary, and being given entirely to the owner. This implies, of course, that your contribution is in fact worth that much, or that the value of the good as embodied by its price is actually equal to your labor, which it isn't. Because, of course, the point of a business is to profit. It would not have been started otherwise. So the price is actually, depending on how you want to phrase it, either the highest price the owner can get away with charging, or the highest the customers are willing to pay for it. It's both, I suppose. In aggregate, of course, not in absolute terms, since every customer is going to have a different perception of when a price is too high. It has no actual relation to your labor, except in the sense that it needs to allow for revenues greater than expenses, which includes labor costs. The only way, then, to argue that the employees deserve those profits is to argue that it's fair, I guess. While there's no direct relation between your labor and the price, in a practical sense, your labor did produce something which was sold, and therefore you contributed to the profit being generated, and therefore deserve part of it. Of course, an owner is under no obligation to do this, since the owner owns the business, and thus all the revenues. And this is why socialists want to abolish private ownership. If the business is owned collectively, then everyone working there is entitled to a share of the profits, and they see this as more fair. Now, I can't directly argue with that because it's a moral judgment. I can only say I don't have a moral objection to private ownership. Starting a business is a gamble. Most businesses fail, and when they fail, the people that own them are liable for all the losses, just as they are then entitled to all the profits if it succeeds. Collective ownership would mean everyone at the business sinks or swims together. If the business fails, everyone working there loses money. Currently, if you're an employee, you don't actually lose anything if the business fails. You only gain money as long as you work there. The owner, on the other hand, will end up with less money than they started with. So, yes, you don't get any of the profits, but you also don't have to worry about staking your entire livelihood on the success of this particular business. If it fails, you can go work somewhere else, and you get to keep the money that you made while the business was still in operation. You don't get any of the profits, but you still came out with more money than you came in with. I'm just saying, this seems like a fair trade to me. Ownership is high risk, high reward. Employeeship is low risk, low reward. There's a reason that, while totally legal and possible to set up, and they do exist, few co-ops exist. Most people, well, a lot of people just don't want to be bothered with helping to run a business, or they're not willing to take on part of the risk of owning one. And I don't blame them, because, as I said, most businesses fail. Many of them not long after being founded. And frankly, I don't really see why we need to force people who don't want to take the risk of investing in a business to do so. Because we already have a system where those who want to take on risk can do so, and those that don't still have a way to make a living. Now, the state socialists are now going to come in smirking that, well, this is why market socialism is a fraud, and state socialism is the true way forward because the market economy itself is the problem. But I don't see any evidence that non-market economies function very well, especially in responding to consumer demands. I mean, even in a democratic state socialist country, which has never existed, the practical problems involved with the command economy would probably just lead to a lowest common denominator kind of economy, where, like, the only burger joint is McDonald's because it's good enough for most people and it won't cost that much. So you'd basically have a mob rule economy where niche markets can't really be served because the majority has to approve of investing in it. And since most people don't care, that won't, for the most part, happen, which will lead to a samey, boring, mediocre economy. Does this mean it would be impossible for niche products to be made in a command economy? No, I can hypothesize ways that it can be done and how you could organize people to get those markets served. But a command economy throws up way more barriers to them than a market economy does. And so there will naturally be fewer of them. And as someone with tastes that often diverge wildly from the average and the mainstream, that's not an economy that sounds very appealing to me.